My name is George Ramsbottom. I work at Teagasc as a dairy specialist. Today here at the conference I'm talking about contract rearing of replacement heifers. I'd like to talk first about the experience of contract rearers in New Zealand and why it's so prevalent in New Zealand. About 2 million dairy heifers are reared off farm in New Zealand, yearlings and weanlings. Those animals are reared on other people's farms, and the reason they're reared on other people's farms is because of the scale and intensity with which operations in New Zealand are being run. So stocking rates are really high in New Zealand, so there's lots of cows being farmed on the dairy farms in New Zealand, and there isn't room for the heifers. And the second reason is because the scale of the enterprise is such that on average they're milking over 300 cows. They simply haven't got the workforce available to specialise in rearing the heifers for their own farms as well, to a large extent. So animals are moved off farm. And we see this as becoming an emerging trend in Ireland as well. With quotas being removed from the 1st of April 2015, farms are expected to grow significantly. We'd expect that over the next 4 or 5 years, post-quota removal, there'll be around 30% more dairy cows in the country. With that in mind, then, two things will happen. The first thing that will happen is the number of cows being managed by individuals on their farms will increase substantially. Nationally, we milk 65 cow dairy herds. This will increase on average to 85 cows. And about a third of herds will be of greater than 100 cows. So there'll be lots more animals around. The second thing that will happen in Ireland is we'd expect a substantial increase. Maybe 3,000 farms will be stocked at over a cow to the acre, or 2.5 livestock units per hectare. The demand on grass on those farms will be quite extraordinary. It'll mean that there'll be lots of meal supplementation going on, or animals will have to be removed from those farms. Farms will do three things. The first option dairy farmers that are operating at high scale or high intensity will do is they'll look to source more land. Some of them will be successful in doing it. The second thing farmers will do is they'll look to remove another enterprise on the farm, or eliminate it or reduce it, such as maybe less tillage on the farm, or remove a beef enterprise and put the heifers on that land. And the third thing they'll do is they'll put the heifers on someone else's farm for contract rearing. Now, typically we'd expect that if this happens, about up to 1,000 farms by 2020 could move their heifers off their own farms and put their heifers on other people's farms for contract rearing. And that would be in the order of 30 heifers per farm, maybe 40 heifers being moved off farm each year onto other people's farms. And this could generate fees for the rearers of around up to 20 million and a cash income of around 5 million per annum. That's what we'd expect would happen. So there's quite a substantial amount of money to be earned by non-dairy people contract rearing heifers on their farms for dairy farmers. So for the rearer who's considering engaging in heifer rearing for someone else, they've a couple of options, and one, they can increase the intensity with which they farm their own operation, so perhaps they've been understocked for a number of years. Or the other alternative is that they reduce the scale of their own operation and bring heifers in instead. The advantages to the rearer of the heifers is they're fairly sure of a good cash flow, at least the money will be coming in on a monthly basis. We'd recommend that money is paid over on a monthly basis from the owner to the rearer, and that will ensure that he has a good cash flow, the rearer has a good cash flow, as well as the owner having a good opportunity to put heifer somewhere else. And the other advantages to him is that he doesn't have to go into the marketplace in the springtime of the year or whenever to buy stock in, so he isn't at the risk of the volatility that exists in the marketplace to purchase cattle for his farm. The third point then is just in terms of the actual contract rearing itself. There's a couple of issues there. The first has to do with the seasonal variation in costs. So if animals are kept contract reared on other people's farms, just be aware of the fact that the costs of rearing them are quite substantially higher over the winter time. So if they keep them for a second winter, the costs are going to be much greater. The second point I'd like to make is that as in any other partnership, contract rearing is a meeting of two people and the engagement between two people, an owner of the animals and a rearer of the animals. Those people need to be trustworthy, open-minded and fair in their dealings with each other. And if the wrong people engage with each other, it mightn't work out so successfully. And the third point is the perennial one of the risk of disease. So there are issues such as TB that have to be dealt with, and we're assured by the DVO they'll be dealt with fairly on a one-on-one basis. And there are also the issue of the non-notifiable diseases such as BVD and IBR. And we would recommend that people will continue to vaccinate for those diseases, because where stock are being moved, there's always a greater risk of those animals contracting a disease. So we need to operate at a high level of disease status. And ideally a contract rearer would only rear the animals for one operator, not for a multitude, because the more herds that are being mixed, the more risk of disease there is. So in summary, 3 points. Number one, contract rearing is successfully operated in New Zealand. Number two, it's likely to become much more prevalent in Ireland than it has been heretofore. And number three, there are benefits for both the rearer and owner of the animals, from both a financial, from a skills and from a lifestyle perspective.